I grew up in an isolated place, and I was homeschooled. No running water, no electricity, no road. So it was pretty isolated. I was homeschooled, and my only access to other people was my family and my parents, their friends. And so I grew up being able to easily communicate, socialize with people that were a generation older than me. Eventually, I go off to university in Vancouver, Simon Fraser University, and I realize, I want to have relations with with a woman, and I want to get to know them, and I want to, I really want to do like the boat tour guy stuff, right? So I'm 20 years old, and 21, hormones, everything's going full blast, and I decide I meet this great girl, and I had zero game, I've slightly, maybe I got one game now, but I had zero game back then. And so the girl, we end up talking to her at university, and she chats with me, and I still was like, oh, does she like me or not? And she's talking to you. I didn't know. I wish I could talk to my younger self. And she's talking to you. Come on, do something here. And no, I didn't do anything. Terrible. I don't know why. Terrible game. Because I grew up in this isolated place, I kind of thought the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That was my role model, Will Smith in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So I went, yo baby, yo baby, yo baby, yo. That works, right? It doesn't. And I kind of struggled with it, and probably some awkward silences, and eventually, she says why don't we hang out? Why don't we go study? And I was like, yeah, let's do that. So we kind of study, and we talk, and I was like, I didn't have any game, of course, so nothing happened. The next time I see her, next week, she's like, oh, well, I'm having a party at my house. Maybe you should, you want to come? And I was like, yeah, of course. And but of course I said it cool, right? Yeah. I think I practiced it, yeah. So I said, yeah, I ended up, she tells me the details, and she messaged me the details back, this is before Facebook and all that kind of stuff, and I really didn't know how to type that well either, because I didn't have a computer growing up, so I was kind of really slow, messaging. Eventually I get the details that come to her place, and this is in Vancouver. I didn't know Vancouver at all either. She gives me this address, I don't know, I don't remember where it was. It was so I write it down, write the address down, and I had a bus pass. So I ended up going, and actually before I go up there, I'm I was really into making personalized CDs for people, and I'd really think about the tracks, how they clashed with each other, and so I made a special playlist CD, and I would even write a little kind of a title on the CD, a personalized message or something, but it was cool, right? And so I made this cool CD, and I had it in my pocket, and I'm okay, where's this place? Vancouver, I don't know this. Eventually I make it to this place, and I walk up to this house, and I'm it's a mansion, right? And it's I'm serious. This is I don't know, I think it was West Vancouver's this crazy affluent neighborhood in Vancouver, and it's a mansion. And I'm holy, wow, this, I'm marrying this girl. She doesn't know it, but I'm pulling out the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air tonight. She's gonna. So I walk into the house, people are there, I casually on time. And so I walk in, and everyone's kind of chatting, and I go sit down. I didn't sit beside her, of course. I sat on the other side. So I see her, and I'm oh yeah, kind of look at her every once in a while, and eventually I ended up sitting beside her. And people are having some drinks. I wish it was rakia. That's great stuff, by the way. But we're just drinking whatever. I'm 20 years old. I don't really know how to drink too much. Wine. I don't know. I can't remember what it was. We were passing around, so I'm having a drink. I'm thinking, yeah, cool. I'm sitting beside this girl and chatting with her. The conversation starts going. How was the semester? And so we're talking, and just right about this time, I think it's around 11 o'clock, and the party's at her house, and her dad walks in. Well, I didn't know. It was like this older guy kind of comes and sits beside us, and I'm just like, yo, what's this guy doing? I'm trying to like cozy up to this gal here, but like this old guy's like ruining my game here. And so eventually she's like, hey, Dad, like, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I just want to check out how the party's doing. And he seemed really cool because it was like having a party in his house. I'm like, my parents said they wouldn't allow that. Like, and his daughter's drinking. Like, what's going on here? Like, this is not northern Saskatchewan here. This isn't going to happen in my house. So I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to feel this out. And then the dad like looks at me, and I'm just like, oh, okay, you know, I'm thinking back to my mom's advice, like how to meet gals, because that's kind of the only advice I had, right, besides and Fresh Prince. And the dad says like, hey, where are you from? So I said, well, northern Saskatchewan. And oh, really? You know, I've traveled all over. Like, whereabouts? And so I'm like, you know what? I kind of look over at this girl, and I'm like, you know, seize the day. So like, you know, my mom always says you got to get in with the parents. So like, might as well answer the questions, like, because what harm could come from this? Northern Saskatchewan, you know, I said it, and you know, I was proud of it. Oh, whereabouts? So I said, oh, this small town called Cumberland House. Oh, and he's like, yo, I haven't been there, but I've been to Laurent, which is like somewhat nearby. It's like a couple-hour drive away. That's like you know, west side for us, right? It's a couple stations away, really. So I'm like, yeah, Cumberland House. Oh, that's cool. We kind of have a conversation, and I'm like, kind of looking at the daughter, and she's kind of sitting there like the old classic, you know, dad look, and I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I'm answering his questions. I'm getting closer to the daughter, which I wasn't because like I was talking to dad, but I had to, right? And he kept answering me these questions. Oh, well, like, what's your background? And I said, oh, well, I'm Cree. Which is like a form of indigenous people in northern Saskatchewan. And, oh, really? And like his eyes kind of like pop out of his head. Like, really? And for indigenous people, when you identify as it, you all of a sudden have to answer all these questions for the entire history of colonization. And he's just like, really? You know? He's really interested all of a sudden. And like, oh, like, what did you do growing up? And I told him, like, I had a unique background. I told you a little bit about it, right? Wilderness and no road. And he's just, like, just looking at me. His eyes are growing bigger. And, like, the daughter's eyes are growing smaller, but the dad's eyes are growing bigger. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm looking and I'm judging this, and I'm kind of like, okay, just answer his questions, because you're making roads. My mom's voice is in the back of my head. So I'm like, oh, okay. He starts asking me details, and then, like, he gets up, like, and he's kind of like, oh, really, really? And he walks to the cupboard, and he opens the cupboard, and I'm like, what's he getting? And he pulls out this, like, pad of paper, and he starts writing his stuff down. And I'm just like, oh, wow, like, this guy's, like, into this. And so he's like, what kind of fish do you catch? And I'm like, oh, you know, we catch walleye, we catch northern, I started listing off the fish that we catch. And, like, I add a couple in there, too, right? And, then he's like, what kind of animals do you hunt? And so I tell him, and, you know, I add a couple in there too, right? Because I'm like, you know, spicing it up a little bit, telling a story. And so it kind of progresses like this. But I get to this point where I'm like, did I go too far? And he says, like, so what do you eat out there? And I tell him, like, what we eat. And I said, you know, one of the things we eat is this bread is called bannock. And he's like, bannock? I'm like, wow. Like, do you make bannock? Like, how do you do it? And I was like, oh yeah, I make bannock. And he's like, you make bannock? And he looks at me like, how do you make it? And I'm just, in this moment, I'm looking at him, and I'm like, I'm trying to, like, remember how to make bannock. See, I was shown it, like, maybe once or twice. And my mom, you know, she makes it all the time. My grandmother, all my family, they make it all the time. But I'm just like, yeah, bannock. You know, we have water, and he's writing this down too. Like, there's no, like, escape. And, you know, we need water. Oh, yeah, water. And I know you needed water, and you need flour. And, like, I kind of, like, say the words as long as you can flour, because I'm trying to think of what are the other ingredients. Flour, and then, lard. And, I'm thinking back, I'm just like, come on, what are the ingredients? And I was like, I get the key ingredient is, I'm not quite sure. The first thing that pops into my head is like baking soda. And I'm like, wait a second, there's toothpaste with baking soda, that doesn't taste good. It can't be baking soda. And I'm like, well, it's baking powder. Yeah, but powder, I don't know. I was kind of like flipping this coin in my head, baking soda, baking powder, baking soda, baking powder. And I knew that was actually the key ingredient. And I was flipping this coin all throughout me saying these ingredients, like what was it? And finally I just like, you know what? I know it's the toothpaste conundrum of the whole baking soda thing. I was like, it's not that. I eliminated it and I said, baking powder. Like I knew what I was talking about, right? And he's like, oh wow. And he's like, you know what? He said, we gotta make some bannock. And that's when I was like, oh yeah, I just went too far. I seized the day. Way too much. And, I look over the daughter and she's not even there anymore. It's just me and the dad. And, I'm thinking, I'm marrying this girl, like this house, like you gotta put in the time here. So he goes and he's like, okay, like what do we need? Well, like I got all the stuff. We have all the stuff to make bannock here. And he pulls out the big bag of flour, water. Of course, he had water in the taps. He has baking powder, salt, lard, all the key ingredients. And he's like, he's just watching me like, what do we put in this? And he's like, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, oh, and I'm like, perfect, okay. I said, well, in the bush, like we just measure by eye. We just measure by our eye. And he's like, D. I could tell he was just like, whoa, this guy's a real bush guy. So I was like, put a big couple things of flour there, and I was like, ooh, looks about right. And I put a little bit of salt in there, and I do remember my grandmother taking the lard and like you kind of knead it into the flour. So I grabbed a little bit of lard and I kneaded it in there. And it was looking good, and I added some baking powder there, and all the ingredients were there. I got the water. I started making a dough, and it looked perfect. And I was thinking, yeah, like I made bannock here. Like it's been I don't know how long. I don't really remember how to make it, but it looks like I made a dough here. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm safe now. I'll just throw this away and walk away, say I made bannock. And he's like, we gotta cook this too. We gotta eat this. I'm gonna call in the wife, get her up, and we're gonna I'm gonna call in my daughter, and we're gonna sit down. We're gonna eat this bannock here. And I'm starting to get nervous here. Like I really don't know what I made. Like, I don't know if it's good. It looks good. So he's like, he gets the oven ready, and I'm like, oh, another idea pops into my head. Okay, I know how I can stall this. And I said, well, we're in the bush. Like, we don't make bannock in the oven. We make it on a fire. So I was like, hey, this guy's no way he's got fire. And he's like, oh, we got a fire pit out back. I'll go get the fire going. So we go back. I have this dough, and I'm just looking at it. I'm just talking to it in my mind, come on, dude, just turn out good. So we go into the backyard, and he guys got this beautiful fire pit. The fire's going, just roasty, toasty. I get some sticks. I put the bannock on a stick. I've seen it. I've just never done it. And I start cooking it. I know how bannock should look, so I'm like, I better make it look like it. So I'm kind of roasting it, and I get this perfect golden brown bannock. And I'm just like, yeah, it looks pretty good. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna get some plates and cut it up. We'll eat it out here. And I said, no, we'll go inside. Go set the table. I want to finish it up here. And he's like, okay, perfect. And he goes inside, and I'm looking at this bannock, and I'm just like, I'm seriously considering just ditching this, taking the bannock, jetting out the back, And so I look at that's what I'm gonna do. But I said, you know what? Might as well taste this bannock. So I grab off a little piece, like roasty brown, looks perfect. Like, I open it up and it looks good. It looks really good. So I like grab this bannock and I put a piece into my mouth and I'm like, that was the best bannock I ever made. That was the best bannock that's ever been made. So carpe diem.